We have questions now for Dr. Diarmuid Scully and for Dr. Seán Ó'Riordáin. The way we're going to run this session for this afternoon is we will just go to the floor, so we'll raise our hands, law of us, and I'll moderate it. We have until 3:15, so 3:15 will be the cut-off time. So we'll open the floor. Thank you. So table 5, Lorraine.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. What happens if there's a direct conflict between the policy that's set at national government level and the wishes of local government? So, for example, housing. National government wants to solve a housing crisis and wants to build lots of housing, but you will often find that local government, or at least local government officials or elected representatives, may be opposed to a housing development because they feel it's too dense or too rushed or too not appropriate for the local area. So my question is when you're dealing with major policy issues, what happens if there's a conflict between what national government want and what local government want? Where should decision-making lie in that instance? Thanks.
So, Seán or Diarmuid, who'd like to take that answer? Maybe Seán?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so, Jim. It's a very interesting question. In part, it's driven by the fact that in most mayoral systems, there are structures, as I was mentioning before we broke up, for conflict resolution based upon agreed shared political programs between the national and the local. Now, that's a concept which is absolutely unknown in Ireland at the moment, although it is a critical proposal which the Limerick implementation group has suggested, and I think would be absolutely necessary as a recommendation coming through from yourselves, if you want to try and ensure that there are means by which a dialogue can be put in place to resolve conflict, because it's a political system, so there will be conflict. That said, the delivery of housing in other countries tends to be quite different from the way it's done here in Ireland, in that very often, once decisions are taken in policy terms by the council to drive forward with particular types of development in particular types of areas, the extent to which there's detailed planning consents is lessened, and there's a greater focus on, if you like, getting the technical pieces right. So the decision is essentially seen as having already been taken. So the constant following of decisions being changed or rechanged or being reanalyzed, you don't get the same extent of that in other countries. There's also a very strong administrative judicial system in most of Northern and Western Europe. We are very dependent upon the common law system that we have here in Ireland, underpinned by constitutional law. So there's a very well established legislative codes built up over quite literally hundreds of years in some countries, where these types of conflicts have been worked through previously, and therefore precedents are already determined, and therefore reduces the amount of conflict that can happen when it comes to that sort of conflict between national and local. But it does happen, and it's part of the political process, and it's something that has to be worked through.
Thanks for that, Seán. I'm going to go to the next table. It's 9, 3, 10, 1 and 7, and then we're on to 2 if we can get there. Table 9 now, I am conscious with John, that's 2 councillors in a row. We've got a question, so just mindful of that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John Walsh. I just have a question, I suppose, around obstacles to decision making. And I wonder what either of you would see as, in terms of kind of major policy areas like housing or public transport, what are the obstacles to effective decision making, either by local government or between local and central government at the moment? I suppose Lorraine mentioned housing, and there has been a lot of debate around how the planning system may slow down the building of housing. But I just from my own, I'm a fairly new councillor, my own experience as a councillor, local government has to jump through a whole series of hoops to get approval for major housing development and faces considerable obstacles in getting approval and support from central government and from the Department of Housing. So I'm just wondering, what's your perspective on that? Thanks.
Yeah, just if I'll jump in if that's okay with Seán. The question really is, where should these decisions be made? Now, you mentioned public transport, and I'll just focus on that for a moment. As a councillor or as a council, you can decide to put in a bus lane. And you can decide we're going to have a quality bus corridor or a bus lane here. You can't decide to put any buses on it because you don't control the bus company. They're completely separated. That's the sort of thing that simply wouldn't happen elsewhere. Now, we do have to be conscious, and I know Seán is constantly mentioning this, that we have to work within the political culture that exists in Ireland, and we have to work within the administrative state that exists. So whatever system we come up with has to try and dovetail with that. I'm conscious that Dublin may have a little bit more leeway in order to push the boat than Limerick did. So all the recommendations we came out with from Limerick were trying to work within the system as currently exists. So the statutory consultation, the sub-cabinet committee, and so on, we're all part of that. But really, most decisions that can be made at local level should be, and that should be the guiding principle. And that's the big sea change that needs to happen, and the way. And just on the question on housing, yes, obviously we're all familiar with NIMBYism, and we're all familiar with objections going in. And I was a councillor for 15 years, and I objected some developments that people in my area didn't want. So I well understand that I'm not going to be holier than thou on this. But a mayor elected for the whole of Dublin is going to have a very large constituency who want houses, and who will be able to vote for them. One of the problems with our current system is because we have small geographically defined constituencies, not that small, but because we have geographically defined constituencies, you get the votes from the people who are currently living there, not from the people who would live there if the houses were built. But within an entire Dublin constituency, you're going to get the votes of the parents who want houses for their children, and of the young people who want to buy houses but haven't yet got it, and the vote is still at home with mum and dad. They're still going to vote for you if you're the one delivering it, and vote against you if you're seen to be the one objecting and blocking it. So the political dynamic changes when it's a single person elected across a broad area than when you're electing small, discrete geographical constituencies. So I think that's part of the change. But so the biggest single thing I would try to get across is the amount of powers that you have as a councillor are far less than what they should be. And while we're talking about a directly elected executive mayor, and we're talking about the powers of that office, one of the principles that Tim O'Connor, I know he's going to be in a couple of weeks to talk about the experience in Limerick, outlined at the beginning, is that the mayor should be a force multiplier for the council, both for the officials and for the elected councils. The idea is to use this to try and drive reform whereby the council has more power and is able to do more things. It's not simply about taking powers away from the councillors and taking powers away from the chief executive and giving them to the mayor. That really would, there'd be some benefit to it, but it wouldn't be much. The real prize for this is reform of local government that delivers more services locally, that gives more control over expenditure locally, and that enables things to drive forward. And if you're deciding where the bus lanes are going, yes, you should be the one deciding where the buses are going. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Thanks for that. So it's 3-10-1-7-2. We're back to 3. Malcolm, I know you've asked a question earlier on. Is there anybody, if you give a bit of space to answer the question, please? If you could just maybe stand up and thank you. Just announce yourself. Thank you.
Hi. Oh,
so it's okay. Thanks.
I might fall down. Seán and Diarmuid, I wonder, could you tell us your preferred model for locals for GMs and why?
We're not supposed to advocate, are we? I think I sort of made my one clear, Seán. Do you want to?
Yeah, just from the chair's perspective, we would not like you to advocate your personal preference, but maybe the benefits and challenges of one such model.
I'll come in there because Diarmuid has been pretty clear. We'll obviously get a chance to debate this a bit more fully tomorrow, but I think the best model is the model that the people of Dublin want and what they're willing to push for.
That's a great answer.
What it is that they're willing to pay for. If you're willing to pay for a very highly developed system with properly functioning responsibilities and so on, you'll go in one direction. Is that a realistic option? In the short term, probably not. I mean, that's one of the really good things that Limerick have done, actually, which, again, I wanted to compliment Tim and his team in the implementation group, because they've given if you like, a platform now for continued rollout of additional services through Limerick City and County Council, if government chooses to advance it on the basis of successful implementation of the proposed programme for Limerick that will be developed up by the first mayor. So I think we're at the start of a journey for Limerick, and I think we're at the start of a journey hopefully for Dublin in whatever manifestation it takes. But it's a journey that's going to take place, and over time we may begin to go back to the sort of structures that are very common across mainland Europe, which are very focused on person-centred services being delivered by the local authority and not by multiple agencies responding into different platforms at national level.
Maria, it's a great question. Dr. Ó'Riordáin, thanks from the chair's perspective, thank you for answering it that way. I'm going to go back to the back of the room now. Table 10, please.
Hi, James is my name. I just have a really quick question about the definition of what you mean by a directly elected mayor. I think a couple of the examples that you spoke about earlier seem to infer that mayors of some of the big cities are elected by the councillors, but I thought the exam question was about the electorate having a separate ballot to vote for a person to give them a bigger mandate. So I just wanted to clarify, is there different ways to elect a directly elected mayor, and what the experts' view on which might be better?
I suppose just to, and I'll jump in on this one because Seán very kindly answered the previous one and got me out of a hole. There are different ways of electing an executive mayor, and the powers of the office are separate to the election. So in France, they still use the Napoleonic system, but originally that consisted of Napoleon saying you're mayor, you're mayor, you're mayor, you're mayor, and handpicking them. Now the councils elect them, but the office has the same power that it had back then. A directly elected mayor is, by definition, a mayor elected by the people in a vote, straight to the position. And my understanding is that's the decision the government have already made. So in effect, we're not debating whether or not it should be a directly elected mayor or a council elected mayor. That decision's been made. It will be a directly elected mayor. They will have executive powers. The questions really for us are what executive powers should they hold, and how should the whole thing be structured? And they're enormous questions, as you've just seen, whether it should be 4 local authorities, whether it should be 1, whether it should be 20, should you have a separate council chair acting as a check on the mayor, exactly what should the role of the chief executive be? Huge questions. The one thing that's already been decided, to my knowledge, is that it will be a vote by the public to choose the mayor, straight up, not a vote by the council, as is currently done.
Thanks. David, I'll go to table 1, please, and then 729.
I know I'm a councillor, Jim, but they did give me permission to ask this question. I did.
I was observing.
I did go
saw
back
the
to
direction.
them, didn't I, Tim? I did. Janice is my name, and our question is around. We had the mayors earlier on, and when the question was put to the 4 of them, 3 of them said that they would put themselves forward for a directly elected mayor. So the question comes from that. Anybody in the state can put themselves forward for election for any office in Ireland. You can put yourself forward for once you have the backing of the people and sometimes a political party. So the question that we have is how do the other places that have directly elected mayors, how do they keep the party politics from taking over once the person is directly elected? How can we ensure that it's the citizens that they are responsible to rather than their party? So I think that's the question, yeah? Yeah.
It's a good question, and if I can try and answer as somebody who used to be a politician and thankfully isn't anymore, it's a political office. So whether it's an independent or a member of Sinn Féin or a member of Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil, Labour Party, Greens, Social Democrats, whatever, they will have a political identity. Even an independent will have a political identity. They will need to work with a council on which it's likely no party will have a majority, and therefore they're going to have to work across parties and try to represent all the people. The question of who makes sure that they work for the people, well, the people do, and you vote them out at the next election if they're not, or the council would probably, and this is something you need to think about and something we have put into the report from Limerick, the council probably needs to have the ability to sanction the mayor if the mayor has gone completely off the rails, up to and including at some point, and it should be a pretty high bar because you don't want the person democratically elected by the people to be removed by the council. But at some point, it should even be possible to impeach a mayor and remove them from office if they're guilty of, crimes and so on. So all of that has to be built into it, and these are the sort of things that you're going to discuss and trash out and come up with. But the nature of the office of mayor tends to be quite different to the nature even of a councillor. Because as a councillor, you're a member of a party or an independent, and you're part of that group. As a mayor, you are trying to represent everybody. So it's a bit more like the President of Ireland, but with executive powers. And whoever the President is and whichever party they represent, when they get into office, they do try to represent all the people, even though they fight ferocious battles to get in there and very party political battles to get in there. Once the election's over, they tend to move beyond that. Mayors often tend to do that as well. And you often find when they're running for a second term, particularly if they've been successful, they run as a sort of a unifying candidate, the father or mother of the people sort of thing. And this often comes about. So you do tend to get people who are elected and re-elected, often with very large votes from the opposing party, if they're successful, because a successful mayor is one that does exactly what you're suggesting and works on behalf of the people.
Okay, so we've reached our time. It's at 3:15. We're going to have to hold it there. Out of due respect for our international guests who are joining us in less than 15 minutes, and indeed for yourselves, to give you a refreshment break. For those tables 7 to 9, and I did notice a couple of other hands going up as well. We do have Dr. Seán Ó'Riordáin back with us tomorrow at 11:15 to discuss high-level options for the type of directly elected mayor and local government structures. So we can, if you could please hold those questions. I just want to say goodbye to everybody online. Thanks for joining us. See you back in 15 minutes. Thank you to Dr. Seán Ó'Riordáin and to Dr. Diarmuid Scully. Thank you.